بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back to another session with Umdatul Talib, the great Mansour al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala. Tonight we're looking at Faslun fi shurut fil bay'. So these are conditions in sales. This is different from shurutul bay', conditions of sales. We talked about the various conditions of sales, meaning what is required in order for the sales transaction to be valid. Now we're talking about stipulations in addition to that. And so, to begin here, the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, يَصِحُّ شُرُوطُ تَأْجِيلِ ثَمَنٍ وَرَهْنٍ أو ضمين معين به وكون العبد كاتبا أو خصيا أو مسلما والأمة بكرا ونحوه وشرط بائع سكن مبيء شهرا مثلا وحملان البعير إلى موضع معين وشرط مشتر على بائع حمل حطب أو تكسيره وخياطة ثوب أو تفصيله. Okay, so briefly, it is valid to stipulate conditions in sale, such as, so yasihhu shartu, the shart here is a condition in a sale, so it's valid, such as deferring payment, providing collateral, designating a specific guarantor, or specifying that a bondservant be literate, a eunuch, Muslim, or that a female bondservant be a virgin, among other similar conditions. Other valid conditions include the seller reserving the right to reside in the property for a month, a camel's transport to a designated location, or the buyer requiring the seller to carry or split firewood, sew a garment, or tailor it. So here, we're looking at, again, conditions in sales, and there are two categories of conditions. The first category is what is known as shart as-sahih. It's a valid condition. Whereas the other one is shart batil, invalid conditions. And each of these categories, both the valid and invalid, have types, which we're going to look at here. And Imam al-Bahuti is alluding to the types without mentioning. He doesn't say there's types, etc. But he mentions the types through examples. Okay, so the valid conditions, by the way, must be established at the time of the sale. You can't conclude a sale and then stipulate your condition afterwards. It's done. And once they're stipulated at the time of sale, they cannot be revoked by the party upon whom they were imposed. So if someone has given a stipulation in the contract and you've accepted it, you can't rescind it. It's done. And again, various types of valid conditions. What we're going to look at now is one of those types, of which has to do with the contract itself. And that's what he mentions here, such as the deferral of the price or a part of the price to a specified and known future date. So you're allowed to make that a condition, that you're going to pay it off at X, Y, or Z date or time. This type also includes, meaning that is related specifically to the contract, stipulating collateral, such as selling an item and requiring the buyer to provide collateral for the payment. Collateral would be, even the item itself could be stipulated as collateral, but collateral could be anything of value that you put up as kind of like a security in the event that you're unable to meet the deadline and fulfill the payment. And we're going to look into the collateral issue in a little more detail shortly. This type also includes stipulating a specific guarantor for the payment or a part of the payment. Right? You are going to identify somebody that's going to be responsible. They'll be on the hook for the payment or a part of it. And it's valid to stipulate specific qualities in the sale. So this is another type. Right? We're talking about stipulations that have to do with the contract itself. And then there are stipulations that have to do with the commodity or the thing that's being purchased. And he mentions the example of a bondservant being able to perform certain tasks or having other desirable qualities. For animals, you can stipulate qualities as well. Like if you're purchasing a camel, you stipulate the camel is fit for carrying loads, or that it has a smooth and swift gait, or that it's milk producing. You may be purchasing a bird, and you could stipulate that it be required to sing, or that it lay eggs, or be capable of returning from a specified distance, meaning you could send the bird off, and it's known that it's able to come back. Like that's the type of bird, it goes out and it can come back to where it launched. Like if you have to send little messages or something. This is quite antiquated. However, these are the examples that the scholars of the past use, and we can try and get an idea of what types of stipulations we could require in transactions for today. Or if you're purchasing land, you may stipulate that land be able to produce something specific or a certain amount of something over the duration of a period of time, like a year. The land produces a certain crop, and it's going to yield X, Y, and Z crops over the period that's specified. Any conditions that you set, any stipulations that you put into the contract have to be, there's two things, within the realm of possibility. Stipulating something outlandish, like we talked about the bird being able to sing. If you were to say, I'll purchase the bird on the condition that the bird wakes me up for Fajr prayer. Right? That's not within the realm of possibility. Like it may be able to sing, it's just not going to know the time and may not be able to wake you up. So that's number one. It has to be possible. And number two, the stipulation has to be permissible. So you can't add a condition to the product or the sale that is impermissible. We've alluded to this earlier about the nature of going into transactions that are impermissible. So here you're just adding a condition to a transaction that the condition itself is impermissible, or the stipulation for basically the product or the commodity being sold, that it be able to do something impermissible for you. So that would be an invalid condition. And if the conditions that meet these here rules, possible, permissible, are not met, once the transaction is made, the sale can be rescinded. Meaning you can return. You're not bound to it. If the conditions are met, the sale is binding. All right? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, Al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim. You find this in Sunnah Abi Dawud. That Muslims are on, meaning they stick to their conditions, their stipulations. Another type of condition is when the seller stipulates a temporary, permissible, and clearly defined benefit for themselves as a part of the sale. So first we had that the stipulation that has to do with the contract or the thing. That's one category. The third category, that's a first category that has to do with the basic fundamentals or foundations of transactions that are basically like, I'm going to purchase that from you as long as you give it to me. I mean, that is not mentioned here because it's of no benefit to mention it, because that's the basic nature of the transaction. It's so expected and understood, there's no need to mention it. So here the third category has to do with the seller receiving some type of benefit. Temporary, permissible, and clearly defined. Benefit for themselves as a part of the sale. An example of this would be the seller reserving the right to reside in the sold property for a specified duration, such as a month or more. I'll sell you my home now on the condition that I can live in it for the next month or the next 3 months. Like, I have to make arrangements for myself. But you buy it now, it's yours, but I have manfa'ah. I'm going to retain this benefit for myself. Okay? Or to use a camel or similar animal to transport. to a specific location. I'm going to sell you my camel now, but the stipulation is I get to use this camel till I get back home because we're on the road, we're traveling. You like the camel, it's like my car. You saw my car on the road, you said I'll buy it from you, and I said I'll sell it to you as long as I can use it to get back home, and then you can come pick it up from my house, or we can arrange some type of delivery or whatever it may be. So in that case, the car is sold right away. The ownership transfers, but I still have usage of the benefit of that car until my stipulation is concluded or been fulfilled. So that's permissible to do, okay? And we can find this, kind of both of these concepts here from the Prophet ﷺ having been reported. You find this in Sunnah Tirmidhi and others. He said he prohibited making exceptions in sales unless they were explicit. Again, that goes back to the concept of the stipulation being clear. It has to be definable and clear. It can't be ambiguous, right? One of the principles in Islamic law of transaction is to avoid ambiguity. You want to avoid what's known as gharar, right, which is something that is undefined, unknown, because that results in dispute and malice and animosity and anger, etc., between community members. Okay, business and commerce isn't meant to be war. Okay, right, as some people might believe or approach it in such a thing. It's, business is war. We're going to war. No. In Islam, there are ethics. There's greater objectives here. Buying and selling is a service to the community that's meant to help your society and not take advantage of or harm others. Okay, so here we're trying to make things very explicit, very clear, so that we don't run into those things. There's another example we find narrated by Jabir, who said that he was traveling on a camel. The camel had become exhausted. He was with the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, upon noticing the camel's weariness, struck the camel and prayed, and he said it then moved with unmatched vigor. It just began to take off. And so the Prophet ﷺ said to Jabir, "Sell me the camel." He said, "I sold it to him, but I stipulated that I would return to my family with the camel," meaning it's yours and it's sold so long as I get to ride it home. And he said, so when I got home, basically I would retain its use until I returned to my family. When I arrived home, I took the camel to the Prophet ﷺ, who arranged for my immediate payment. You find this story in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. So it's valid for the buyer. It's also valid for the buyer to stipulate a condition. So there's the seller stipulating a condition. The seller saying, look, I'm going to be able to use this for a certain duration or for a certain purpose. And the buyer can also stipulate a condition for a related service to be performed by the seller. And that's what Imam al-Bahuti mentions when he talks about firewood. He talks about the seller stipulating a condition beyond buying the firewood, that the firewood be transported. Like, I'm going to buy the firewood on the condition that you deliver it to my home. I'm not buying this firewood and then I'm carrying it. I'm buying the firewood and you're carrying it, okay, to a designated place. Or he says, I'll buy this wood, but you have to split it for me. Maybe it's raw material. It's not been processed. I'll buy the wood as long as you split it. Or he buys a garment, a bolt of fabric, or a garment that's not fully complete, or that is but needs some alteration. So he says, I'll buy the garment from you, but you have to sew it for me. Or I'll buy it, but you have to tailor it for me. You have to take up the pants. You have to hem in. You have to make some of these alterations. So of course, it's related to the commodity. The service is related to the commodity, and it's clearly defined. Ultimately, this type of stipulation combines what happens here as a sale and a service contract. And this can be done. It's valid if the benefit is clearly defined, requiring the seller to adhere to these types of conditions. Imam Bahuti goes on to kind of further constrain these stipulations. He says, وَإِن جَمَعَ بَيْنَ شَرْطَيْنِ كَحَمْلِ حَطَبٍ وَتَكْسِيرِ بَطَلَ الْبَيْعِ. كاشتراط عقد آخر من سلف وقرض وبيع وإجارة وصرف وكتعليقه على شرط مستقبل. So here he says if two conditions are combined, such as transporting and splitting firewood, the sale becomes invalid, just as it does when another contract is stipulated alongside a sale, such as an advance purchase, a lending agreement, a sale, a lease, or a currency exchange, or when the sale is made contingent upon a future condition. So here, the author refers to the second category. We were first looking at the valid conditions. Now he shifts to the invalid conditions. And the invalid conditions also have a variety of types. Okay? So the first thing we look at is if two conditions are combined, even if they would have been valid individually, as the example that I gave before, I'm buying the firewood with the condition that you deliver it. That's one. Cool. Or I said, I'm buying the firewood so long as you're splitting it for me. No problem. But if I said, I'm buying the firewood on the condition that you split it and you deliver it, I've given two conditions. Or I bought the bolt of fabric or the garment and I said, not only are you going to sew it, but you're going to tailor it to me. The sale becomes invalid. And this is based on the hadith of Ibn Umar, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, it is not lawful to combine a loan and a sale, like in one transaction, nor two conditions in one sale, nor a sale contingent upon another sale. So what we're looking at right here is nor two conditions in one sale. Right? The idea is that the transaction is meant to be simple and not a burden. Right? So you can add a condition related to the commodity, but when you start adding more than that, it now becomes complicated. And it's possible that you take advantage of somebody. So what you should do is make those things separate. I'll buy the firewood, I'll buy the wood, but you have to split it as one transaction. And then if you want it delivered, then you say, and how much do you charge for delivery? Is there a delivery charge? Or do I have to get a third party, like a Uber Firewood, right? That's going to charge for the delivery of my chopped firewood. Right? So you can't stack up all these conditions. I need you to, I'll buy the wood, but you got to split it, and you got to deliver it, and you got to stack it up at my home, and then you got to put it in my fireplace, and then you got to start the fire, and then you got to cook the porridge, and then you could take advantage of somebody, especially if they're in a situation where they're in need. Okay, so you have to keep things simple. So that's what we're looking at right here. Another type of invalid sale is when one party stipulates the fulfillment of an added contract. And that goes back to the first part of this hadith. He says it's not lawful to combine a loan and a sale. So examples of combining an additional contract with the sale include, as was mentioned by Imam al-Buhuti, stipulating an advanced purchase, which is known as salam. Here in the text, you'll note that he says, كَاشْتِرَاطِ عَقْدٍ آخَرَ مِنْ سَلَفٍ. Min salafin a salam. That's what it means here. Bay'u salam, which we're going to look at in greater detail later to talk about the definition of what that type of transaction is. However, it's an advanced purchase. I'll buy such and such basically before it's ready, before it's available. And this is typical for like crops and produce. Okay? I need 1,000 kilos of X, Y, and Z produce. The farmers, they're not harvested yet. They're not even ready yet. You go and you make that purchase. The farmer basically guarantees that, and then you basically you get your goods on delivery. All that stuff's clearly defined. So here you would make a condition. I'll buy this. So for example, I'll sell you my car on the condition that you advance me such and such amount for such and such item. Now I've got two things going on in one. You get this if you do that. I'll sell you the car if you do that. Another one would be a loan agreement. I'll sell you my car on the condition that you lend me such and such amount. Or a sale. I'll sell you my car on the condition that you sell me such and such item for such and such price. I'll sell you my car if you sell me your home. right? You've basically taken two into one. You've made one contract contingent upon the other one. I'll sell you my car on the condition that you rent me your apartment for such and such amount, or a currency exchange. These are all things he mentions there. I'll sell you my car on the condition that you exchange the price for another currency. So none of these transactions are valid. You can't combine an added contract to one. So that's another type. Another type after that of invalid condition is a stipulation contingent on a future event or occurrence. So you say, I'll sell you this item if you come to me. That's a contingency there, that if the person comes, it's like a if-then. I'll sell you this if that happens. I'll sell you this if so-and-so is happy with it, if Zaid approves of it, or I'll buy this item if Zaid approves of it. There's a contingency factor here based on future occurrences. So essentially what happens here, the idea is that a transaction transfers ownership upon agreement. I agree, I'm the owner now. But what this does is it suspends that transfer of ownership for something that's unknown to happen or not happen. So it undermines the very nature of the transaction. There's an exception to this. If someone says, Insha'Allah. Because you might literally think, it appears to be rather contingent upon mashi'atillah. I'll sell you this, insha'Allah, or I'll buy this, insha'Allah. So this is, of course, valid to say during sales because it's not a condition more than it is an intention seeking the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The person says, insha'Allah. He goes on and he says, وَإِنْ شَرَطَ أَلَّا خَصَارَةَ عَلَيْهِ أَوْ مَتَى نَفَقَ الْمَبِيعُ وَإِلَّا رَدَّ أَوْ أَلَّا يَبِيعَهُ أَوْ يَهِبَهُ أَوْ نَحْوَهُ أَوْ إِنْ أَعْتَقَهُ فَوَلَاؤُهُ لِبَاعٍ فَسَدَ الشَّرْطُ وَصَحَّ الْبَيْءُ وَلِمَنْ فَاتَ غَرَضَهُ الْفَسْخ. So here he says if a condition is stipulated that exempts the buyer from any loss, allows them to return the item if it does not sell, or prevents the buyer from selling or gifting the item, or if the buyer emancipates a bondservant on the condition that the bondservant's loyalty reverts to the seller, then the condition is invalid, but the sale remains valid. In such cases, the party whose objective was unfulfilled has the right to annul a contract. So let's look at that carefully, one thing at a time. So we're introduced to another stipulation here, or invalid stipulation, which is when the condition undermines the purpose of trade. It undermines the purpose of commerce itself. وَإِنْ شَرَطَ أَلَّا خَصَارَةَ عَلَيْهِ. The first example given is when a buyer stipulates that the seller that they are to be exempt from any loss regarding the sale item. أو متى نفق المبيع وإلا رده. Okay, so here basically the guys, so think about this in commercial transactions where I'm buying products from you as a reseller. You're the wholesaler, I'm the reseller. I'm going to buy a whole bunch of stuff from you, and I'm going to make a condition because I don't want to sustain any losses. I'm going to say, look, I'm not taking a loss for this stuff. So I stipulate a return if it doesn't sell. Say, look, when the item sells, we're good. Otherwise, I'm returning it because I'm not going to take a loss. So what are you doing for me as the seller, the wholesaler? You're putting me in a bind. I'm selling you these products. And the idea is I sell them, they're yours. Khalas, Habibi, they're yours now. You've bought these products, you've bought these things. They're yours now. I'm walking away. I'm carrying on my business. I've taken the money. Now I'm going and I'm continuing my trade. But if you're saying, wait, no, wait, you're on the hook until I sell these without taking a loss, then yeah, this condition is invalid. Right? He says, فَسَدَ الشَّرْطُ وَصَحَّ الْبَيْعُ. Okay, so the transaction is valid. However, the nature of that condition or stipulation is invalid. So again, this happens. This is likely to happen in commercial sales. If a person says, I accept that, they have another arrangement. They'd have to come up with a different type of arrangement. Yeah, it would be some type of agreement as a reseller, as opposed to I'm taking ownership of this. Once you take ownership of it, it's done. You have no recourse after that. But if a person is going to act as a reseller, then that's a totally different agreement altogether. Yeah, the seller and the buyer, they can't take that. Yeah, that undermines the very nature of the transaction. The ruling is similar if the seller stipulates to the buyer that he cannot sell, gift, or otherwise dispose of the sold item. So if I were to say to you, I'm selling you my car, so long as you don't sell it to somebody else. Because I love this car and I see you regularly, I just want to see the car. I want to see you driving the car. I just want to see I don't know, for whatever reason. You can't gift it. You can't sell it. You can't dispose of it. Or I'm going to sell you this thing, but you have to endow it. You have to make it an endowment. I'm going to sell you this building on the condition that you make it an endowment. Right? So basically, I'm crossing the line in terms of what I can do. It's yours to own, and when you own it, you do as you wish with it as long as it's permissible. I can't make a condition upon the nature of your ownership. This is a condition or a stipulation that goes beyond the scope of the very essence of a contract or a business transaction. So we can look at an example here from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Before we do that, he talks about the bondservant. He says a seller stipulates that if the buyer frees a bondservant, there's a stipulation here. If the buyer frees a bondservant, the allegiance, what's known as al-wala, will remain with the seller. So wala, when it comes to the emancipation of bondservants, there's some legal ramifications for this in Islam. That if you were to emancipate a slave, then you're connected to them. Not only in the act of emancipation, but in there's some legal rulings attached to this emancipation. One of those is inheritance. In the event that the emancipated bondservant has no inheritors when they pass away, you are attached to them in this regard, that you would inherit, such that their wealth or whatever they have is not going to be disposed of and given to some other cause. But because you are the one that emancipated them, you have this unforgettable bond with them now. Okay? So here in this example, the seller who's selling the bondservant, such that they're requiring the bondservant to be set free, that their wala stays with them. You're buying and emancipating the bondservant, but we are going to retain the right of inheritance. This is an invalid condition. The sale itself is valid, as the condition pertains to something beyond the scope, again, the contract. So it was narrated that Barira came to Aisha radiallahu anha asking for help with her contract and manumission. So she was a bondservant. She was getting ready to purchase her freedom, and she went to Aisha in order to get some help. Aisha said, go back to your masters, and if they agree to let me pay off your contract of manumission and let your loyalty be to me, then I will do it. Meaning this inheritance. This is what specifically Barira told her masters about that, but they refused and said, if she wants to seek reward with Allah for freeing you, then let her do so, but your loyalty will be with us. She told the Prophet ﷺ about that, And the Messenger of Allah ﷺ instructed her to buy her and set her free, and loyalty belongs to the one who set the bondservant free. And then he said, addressing everybody, what's the matter with people who stipulate conditions that are not in the book of Allah? Whoever stipulates something that is not in the book of Allah, it is not valid even if he stipulates 100 conditions. The condition of Allah is more deserving of being followed and more trustworthy. You find this in Sahih Muslim. So here you get kind of an idea of what that looks like in terms of the stipulations that were made, etc. So if either party, whether the buyer or seller, is adversely affected, so this is the conclusion of Imam Buhuti's section here, about these stipulations, if either one is adversely affected by the invalidity of the condition, right? They're going to sell something based on a stipulation, and then this stipulation is pointed out that that's an invalid stipulation, they have the right to annul the sale. This applies whether they were aware of the ruling or ignorant of it, as the condition they relied upon in entering the contract is nullified by Islamic legal principles. They might have just were willing to enter into the contract because of the stipulation that they were going to set. Like, we'll do that, but this has to happen along with it. And they say, no, that's not a valid condition. But because you said it, it's done, right? Now it may cause undue harm. And so basically what we're saying here is that if this is the case, this is pointed out, then they have the right to rescind either the purchase or the sale of the item. And the same ruling applies if the seller stipulates any of the aforementioned conditions to the buyer. The condition alone is invalid. However, the affected party retains the right to annul the sale if their intended benefit from the condition is lost. The next section he says, وَيَسِحُ شَرْطُ عِتْقٍ وَبِعْتُكَ عَلَى أَن تَنْقِدَنِي أن تنقدني الثمن إلى كذا وإلا فلا بيع بيننا فإن لم يفعل انفسخ لا قول لمرتهن إن جئتك بحقك في وقت كذا وإلا فالرهن لك ونحو. So here he says, it's valid to stipulate the emancipation of a bondservant as a condition. Okay, this is important right here because this gives us an exception to what was just mentioned about these conditions that undermine the nature of the sale. If a person's buying a bondservant, a commodity, the seller is not permitted to place a condition on that transaction that would impede them from utilizing it in the way they desire. As I said, if you buy my car, you can't sell it again. If you buy this building, you have to endow it. You're not permitted. That's an invalid condition. However, وَيَسِحُ شَرْطُ عِتْقٍ. Here they're saying, but it's valid for you to stipulate the emancipation of a bondservant. You can say you can buy this bondservant so long as you free it. Free him or her. Okay, so this is a valid condition here as an exception. So here, keep that in mind. Stipulate the emancipation of a bondservant as a condition, or to state, I sell to you on the condition that you pay me the price by such and such date, otherwise there is no sale between us. That's a valid stipulation. If the buyer does not fulfill the condition, the contract is dissolved. However, it is not permitted for someone offering collateral to state, if I bring your due payment by a specified date, otherwise the collateral becomes yours, or similar conditions. We're going to look at that. I told you about collateral earlier. We're going to look at some of the details right now. So here, it's valid to stipulate, meaning a seller's condition upon the buyer, the emancipation of a bondservant in a sale. The buyer is compelled to fulfill this condition, and the loyalty, the wala, belongs to the emancipator. And this is based on that hadith of Barira, in which the seller stipulated the bondservant's emancipation. It was accepted. The Prophet ﷺ said, buy her, free her, and al-wala belongs to the one who emancipated her. And this is an exception to the general rule that invalidates conditions in a sale that impose obligations on the buyer unrelated to the sale itself. And the rationale behind this exception is that emancipation of bondservants or freeing of slaves is a virtuous act in Islam. It's a form of worship, it's a type of qurbah, and similarly, it's a right owed to Allah, much like when a person makes a vow, a nadhr. It becomes an obligation to Allah, not to the other party. And so that's why there is an exception here, right? Freeing slaves fulfills the lofty objectives of Islam, which are basically equality among people, liberating people. This condition here, which requires the purchaser of a bondservant to emancipate the bondservant, blocks any subsequent sale of that bondservant. This is because the obligation to emancipate creates a binding right that cannot be overridden by a subsequent transaction. Allowing such a sale would lead to a problematic sequence of unfulfilled obligations, undermining the original binding condition of emancipation. So if someone were to purchase a bondservant or a slave with the condition that they have to be emancipated, meaning once the sale is concluded, I sell this slave to you on the condition that you emancipate them, and you say, sold, guess who's free? That slave. You can't then go, and I'll sell them to you for X amount of dollars. But I mean, again, this is not a applicable scenario. However, the concept, I think, is important in a time in which sometimes we're answering questions to people about bondservants and slavery in Islam. And where do we stand on all this stuff? So to understand the impact that the process has on business legal code, it's such an important thing that it, in and of itself, creates an exception to the rule. Okay? Because it's different than any other commodity. Okay? If the buyer refuses to fulfill the condition, meaning to emancipate the bondservant, a judge has the authority to enforce it by emancipating the slave on behalf of the buyer. Under normal circumstances, these conditions that impose obligations unrelated to the sale, like requiring a buyer to provide unrelated services, are considered invalid because they distract from the primary purpose of a contract. However, because emancipation is a divine obligation and aligns with the moral and spiritual goals of the Sharia, it is allowed and it is binding. Another exception he mentions has to do with the general rule of preventing stipulations contingent upon future events. Remember we said you can't say I'll sell you this if such and such happens. But here he says it's valid to state I sell to you on the condition that you pay me the price by such and such date. That's a stipulation based on a future occurrence. Otherwise, there's no sale between us. If the buyer does not fulfill this condition, the contract is dissolved. So the sale is concluded upon acceptance. You give the stipulation, sold, but if the buyer then fails to fulfill the condition of payment within the stipulated time, so if they said within 1 week, that 1 week comes and they don't give you the money, the sale is annulled because the condition hasn't been met. So now I'm taking that back. Okay? This is similar to stipulating an option to rescind, which is known as khiyar. And that's something that we're going to look at in detail because that's a much longer chapter, actually right after this. And that's been reported by Omar, as we're going to see shortly in the coming weeks. The buyer, so that's about the seller. The buyer can also say, I buy on the condition that you deliver the sold item to me within X amount of days, like 3 days, for example. And if you fail to do so, I have the right to rescind the sale. I'm buying it and I need it in a week. I'm buying the car because I need a car in a week. If you don't give me the car in a week, then I have no use for it at that point. So I set this stipulation, and in the event that I bought the car, it's my car now. The transaction is completed, and then you don't deliver, I have the right to rescind the sale. So the sale here and the condition are valid, and the buyer has the right to rescind if the condition is not fulfilled. The other thing he talked about was collateral. He says about offering collateral that it's not valid for a person offering collateral to say to the creditor, if I bring you your due payment by such and such time, the collateral remains with me. But if not, then the collateral becomes yours. Okay, so understanding the nature of the scenario, you're buying something basically like on credit, and then you're putting up something as collateral. It's like a security. You're saying, look, I'm going to buy this thing from you, and I'm going to put my car up as collateral. My car, I'm buying something for $10,000. Let's say my car is worth $15,000. I'm going to put my car up as collateral. So now you know that, okay, I'm serious. I'm a serious buyer, even though I might not have the cash on me to pay for this commodity, but I have put up something of value, and you know that, look, at the very least, I can recover the cost through this item of collateral, the car. Okay, it's 15 grand. All I need is 10 out of it. Easy peasy. I'm happy to do it, right? But you can't say, if I bring you the payment by such and such time, the collateral remains with me. That's fine and understood. But if not, then the collateral becomes yours. This part right here, this last statement where you say the collateral becomes yours, is a statement that does not constitute a valid sale. As the Prophet ﷺ said, the collateral cannot be taken away from its owner. Meaning ownership doesn't transfer automatically when I've offered you the collateral. This was explained by Imam Ahmad to mean this exact thing. So this condition violates the principle that ownership of collateral, which is arahan, does not transfer to the creditor upon default. Okay, so if I don't pay you by that date, the car is not all of a sudden yours. You don't own the car now. Okay? Instead, the collateral serves only as a security for the debt, ensuring the creditor has legal recourse to recover the loan amount if the debtor fails to pay. So basically now I have an agreement that there is some tangible thing by which I can recover the money. But now we have to come to an agreement, or we have to have arbitration in order for that to happen. The creditor cannot precondition ownership of the collateral upon default, because allowing the creditor to automatically own the collateral could result in them taking more than the loan amount, which is considered gharar. And it is akin to riba. Okay, so in the event that again, it was a $10,000 transaction. I put up my car, which is worth $15,000 on the market as collateral. If we allowed the seller to automatically take ownership of my $15,000 car, it's now his to do what he wants with it. He sells it for 15 grand. What has happened? He's gotten 5,000 more than the agreed upon price. And that's akin to riba. It's also, and it's left this uncertainty there as to what is actually going to happen to that collateral and the associated value or the money that they're going to get out of it. So the collateral, again, is intended to secure the debt, not to serve as a substitute for repayment without a fair sale or proper settlement. So there needs to be some steps that happen here, right? The one that the seller here, or the creditor, has the right to that, has the right that that car be sold, and they can recover their money. However, the creditor would need permission to sell the collateral, or again, they would seek mediation in court. They would go to court. Look, this is the contract. This was the nature of our agreement. They even put up collateral, and now I'm trying to recover what I lost. So the court's is now gonna rule that this vehicle has to be liquidated. And how much was the deal? $10,000. So you go and you offer the vehicle for a fair price. It sells for 15. How much goes to the creditor? 10. And what happens to that 5? Goes back to the owner of that collateral, which was me. So I get the 5 grand, and then I've taken care of my 10 grand debt. All right, this is what the Prophet ﷺ said, the collateral cannot be taken away from its owner. So it's not by default. You can't even put that in there as a condition, that I'll give you the collateral if I default. No, no. The collateral, again, it's a security. That's it. It's there to essentially allow for recourse to recover debt and no more. All right? And then there is a note here, because we're talking about collateral, etc. Advanced payment sales, what's known as arbun, where you give an advance payment on a sale or on a lease. And this is structured similar. These are valid payments, by the way. And in these transactions, a buyer or a leasee provides an upfront payment to the seller or to the leaser, with the understanding that if the deal goes through, the payment is considered a part of the total price or the rent for their lease. And if the deal does not go through, the seller or leaser keeps the upfront payment. Okay, so this is different than collateral. This is, here, the thing's $10,000. I'm going to give you this arbun of $1,000. Basically, I want you to hold this thing. This is like a good faith payment. Here you go. Means I'm serious, but I got to take care of some business to get the rest of it. And to show you that, if I don't come back to complete the sale, that's yours. If I do come back to complete the sale, that's mine, and I'm gonna meet the total. I'm gonna make the total up with what I bring you to conclude the sale. So in the event that I walk away from the sale, this good faith payment, that's yours. That's not collateral. It's a different type of agreement. Goes on, he says, وَمَنْ بَاءَ بِشَرْطِ الْبَرَاءَةِ مِنْ كُلِّ عَيْبٍ. This is important right here. لَمْ يَبْرَأْ مَا لَمْ يُعَيِّنْهُ أو يبرئه بعد البيع وإن باع ثوبا ونحوه على أنه 10 أذرع فبان أقل أو أكثر صح بقسطه ولمن جهل وفات غرضه الفسخ. So this is the last part here. If a seller includes a condition releasing them from liability for all defects, they are not freed from liability unless they specify the defect or the buyer releases them after the sale. Okay, so look at this. This is like a as-is sale. I'm selling this car as is. Take it or leave it. If someone sells an item with the condition of being free from all defects or free from a specific defect if it exists, the seller is not absolved of the liability. The buyer has the option to rescind the contract if they find an undisclosed defect at the time of the sale, unless the defect was specified to the buyer, in which case the seller is absolved because the buyer entered into the contract with full knowledge. So here, if you're selling a car, for example, I can't release myself of liability for its defects unless I have explicitly mentioned those defects. So I would have to tell you what's wrong with the car. Otherwise, you could return it back. I can't say, yeah, it's sold as is. They said, did you know that was a problem? Yeah, I knew there was a problem, but you didn't ask and you didn't check. You just took it as is. Tough stuff. No, you're still on the hook for liability. The purchaser can either go, okay, I won't hold you liable, or they can go, no, I bought the car, you didn't tell me there was anything wrong with it, which you're obligated to, and because I got it, and now there's there's something wrong with the transmission, you're taking it back. I want my money back. So here you can see, again, we're looking at Islamic etiquette or ethics, business ethics. Okay? So what happens when I sell you the vehicle and I conceal the defects? And you buy it from me and then I go, oh, that was an as-is sale. Sorry. You should have been more thorough in your investigation. You should have brought a mechanic. You should have known more about cars, that you could hear the sound, because I can when I start it. You should know about the things that you're buying and not look at me. It's war. What happens What do you think about me now? If I did you dirty like that, what would you think? I'm not trustworthy. What else? Lay it on me. Give it to me. Oh, I'm going to give it to this. Oh, who knows how far that could escalate. How, especially if it was a desperation a transaction where like, look, I just gave you everything I had. I bought this car because I needed to use it for my business. I'm going to Uber. This is how I'm going to make my livelihood. And I just gave you all my money. Now I have nothing and no means to earn a livelihood. How mad are you going to be? You're devastated. I've just destroyed you. I've maybe put you in a worse predicament than you were before, because before you had $10,000 for a vehicle and I sold you a lemon without basically disclosing the defects. Right? So again, the Islamic ethics in trade are meant to, the trade again is meant to be a thing that, helps people and is a service to people, not a thing that hinders people and detracts from their quality of life. Or makes it worse than that. Yeah.
What if you sell it to a mechanic? Knows you got it, take it to him, fix it before. He knows, but you don't know what else is there, okay? Sicilians, right?
Yeah, so if,
Problem.
in the event that,
Mechanic,
sure, in the event, forget the mechanic, just anybody. Right? You go and you say, look, here's my car. I'm going to sell this car, but it needs some work. Okay? It needs some work. What work does it need? Brakes, tires, AC. That's all I know. Otherwise, the car runs fine. I'm being honest and forthright. I understand that's all that I know that needs to work with the car. And so because of that, normally this car would be 10 grand, but because of that work that it requires, obviously I'm going to say like it's 8 grand or whatever it may be. The person goes, okay, I will take the car as is with those defects, and I'm not going to hold you liable. In the event that, it could be that in the event that they find another minor thing, they've already accepted with defects, it would have to be something that would render that vehicle not usable. Like the engine went out. I took it off the thing and it just died, or the transmission just died, or something that would render the car to be completely inoperable. And now, even though you've highlighted some of the defects, this type of defect is so egregious that they could have the right to rescind the sale. That's about when it comes to a release of a liability for defects. Again, we can revisit the topic at another point. The next thing he talks about, he says, if one sells a garment, for example, on the condition that it measures 10 cubits, and it turns out to be less or more, the sale is valid at a proportional price, but the buyer who was unaware and whose objective was unfulfilled may annul the contract. So here we're talking about measurable things. All right, so let's look at something specific, like an example. All right, if a piece of cloth, for example, or something similar, such as a measured property, like a piece of land, or even like a building, is sold on the condition that it's a certain measurement, like 10 units long. If we're looking at a piece of cloth, 10 units long, and then later discovered that it's less than that, or more than that, it's 9 or it's 12. The sale is valid for the lesser amount, proportionate to its price. Any excess belongs to the seller. So basically, I bought a piece of a garment for such and such amount of money. Under the for 10, I wanted 10 feet for $10. Okay, and then I realized that it's 11 feet. He didn't know. Oh well. Last time we were together, we were talking about muhasabah and muraqabah, right? Self-accountability and vigilance, which is based on Allah's supervision, divine supervision. Okay? He doesn't know, but I come to find out it's 11 feet. 11 feet. What's the deal? What's the ruling? The ruling is, I paid for 10. 10 is mine. The excess belongs to the seller. Now I got to go to the seller and say, I'll make up the difference. The seller could say, nope, you can keep it, no problem. Or I got to make up the difference. Or I got to take that foot and I got to give it back to him. Doesn't belong to me. The same thing goes the opposite way. I buy it for 10 feet for $10. I get home and realize it's only 9 feet. I paid an extra $1. Now what? Seller goes, huh, tough stuff. Walked out the door. Sale's over. You should have checked. No, he's going to go, oh, I didn't give you what you paid for? Here's an extra foot. In the event that you say, look, I need 10 feet exactly. Nothing I can do with 9 feet and then a foot. You can rescind the sale altogether. You say, look, I came for 10 feet. I needed exactly that amount. Anything less is not going to be of help for me. He can say, all right, well, he'll give you $1 back. Here's for the, you gave me 9. You gave me 10. You ended up with 9 feet. Here's your $1 back. You say, nope, I can't do that. I rescind the sale because I needed 10 feet exactly. So now the objective of the purpose of it was lost, and so now I can rescind. And that's how it works with things that are measurable. If both parties agree to adjust the price to take in account for the excess or the deficiency, it's permissible to do that. Otherwise, they can rescind. However, if the sold item is something like a pile of grain sold as 10 measures and it turns out to be more or less, the sale remains valid and there is no option to rescind. The excess belongs to the seller and the deficiency is their responsibility, right? It's a pile of something. It's easy enough to take back or to give more. It's not like an object that's measured. Land, I needed land. That's X amount of acres. If I have anything less, I don't need it. I can't build on it what I'm building. Right? But in this case, you can't rescind because the objects can easily be added to or detracted from. Right? It's not that I needed a certain size of grain. It's a pile. You can just add to it and it gets you to that amount. Right? So here you can see the difference between measured items versus piles of things that are measured in different ways. And that's where we'll wrap up for the evening. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for your attentive listening and your patience. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا